In the interest of your schedule and trying to keep on time, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Just a little bit of backdrop about this conversation. And first, let me introduce myself. I'm Steve Kelly. I'm the Vice President of Economic Development for the Lawrencechambers. And we have a number of other speakers that I'll be introducing here in just a moment. But just as a bit of backdrop, this conversation is about possibilities of some economic relief, not only through the CARES Act funds that the county has received, which will be the primary focus of this discussion, but there's also going to be a bit towards the end where we talk about the next round of CARES Act funding, which, while we don't have exact detail, is in the works, and we're going to maybe try to give you a little preview of what that may look like, just so you're aware of what's coming down the pike. But first, I wanted to kind of set up the situation, and you know, we all know that the coronavirus pandemic has had incredible impact on the community. It varies from business to business and individual to individual, but I don't think there's any of us that haven't been touched. And we know, particularly in certain sectors of our economy, the damage has been extensive and is not over yet. And there's still going to be some pain to be felt, and we understand that and are very sympathetic and are trying to do all we can to help as we can. And I think just looking at the stats, you can certainly see what some of the impacts have been. You know, prior to March, when this all hit, we were running at about a 3% unemployment rate. Immediately after, we spiked up to between 15 and 20%, and that's leveled off a bit. We're right now, based on the latest labor data from June, we're at like 8.3%, which is above the state average, which is of about 7.5%. We've got, probably compared to the number of people that were unemployed pre-COVID, we're at about 3,400 people who have lost jobs that are not employed in the county that were before. So there certainly have been impacts, and they continue. And I think just to kind of point some of the difference, in addition to the statistics on unemployment, back in November of 19, Lawrence was one of a number of communities that were featured as in Bloomberg publications as being one of the top places as with prospects for being top tech hubs. And they pointed out how university communities were the place to be, that there was so much going on and so much opportunity, and that university communities would be the drivers going forward. And that's in contrast to an article that came out in late June where this article was in the New York Times, that talked about how we could be feeling the impacts of the virus for a number of years in university towns. And so I think it just points out how significant the impacts have been, how unexpected and how quickly they've come upon us. And so we're hoping today to shed some light on some potential opportunities through CARES Act funding, both at the county level and then from the broader state program that may be of assistance and certainly are worth considering and taking a look at. And just for kind of definitional sake, the CARES Act, for those of you who aren't familiar, and I think you probably are, it stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Stimulus Act. And that's a federal assistance program. And then you're also going to be hearing about SPARK and the SPARK Task Force. And SPARK stands for Supporting People and Revitalizing Kansas. And that is the state's organizational effort to manage and handle and distribute monies that came to the state from the CARES Act via the federal government. And there's been a number of different CARES Act buckets, but as part of the funding that we're talking about today, the state of Kansas received $1.25 billion. And then of that, $24.9 million was allocated by the SPARK Task Force based on a formula to Douglas County. And so that's the primary focus of today's discussion. But there are other funds that we're looking at down the road that will probably being announced pretty soon, that will be other opportunities potentially for some economic relief. The outline for today, or kind of our run of show, if you will, is following my comments. we're going to have Sarah Plinsky, the Douglas County Administrator, give us some context and background on the CARES Act monies and the county process. We're going to have Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager for the City of Lawrence, talk with us about the process that we've established for application, talk about eligibility, some of the priorities that we're looking at, information more related to the direct ask that might be coming, and or providing you some details on how to go about the process, etc. And then we're going to have Jasmine Moore, who's the Sustainability Director for the City of Lawrence and Douglas County, and Paula Smith, who is an employee of the Kansas Department of Education, and his position is Mentor Kansas Director of the Kansas Volunteer Commission, who will talk to you about equity aspects of this, which are very important to our process. And I will also comment that Jasmine and Paula has been very, very important to this process and been very helpful in a variety of ways. And so we really appreciate their involvement. And then we're going to conclude the commentary part, or the speaking parts, with an update to the best of our knowledge, and this is very fluid, on the round 2 of Spark funding, which is what I mentioned related to the state's next round, which we anticipate will be coming out very quickly, but it is not out yet. In fact, the Spark Task Force is meeting today to make their to review the recommendations and take action on a set of different priorities and funding possibilities that we'll be discussing a little later. So this is all very much current and very much in play right now. And again, not enough detail as we'd like, but we'll do the best we can to provide you what we can do. I will ask, from a kind of a housekeeping standpoint, we have several speakers, and I'm going to ask everyone to stay on mute until your opportunity to speak. For those of you who have questions, and this is all about questions and being able to respond to those, we're going to ask you to place those in the chat box. And then at the conclusion of the presentations, we're going to have a period of time, 30 minutes or so, and we'll go through the chat box and work through that. You know, additionally, I didn't mention that Ryan Raines, who is the Business Development and Programs Manager at the Chamber, will be helping, or will be part of that conversation about the round 2 of Sparks. And Brit, Concano, who is the Economic Development Director for the City of Lawrence, is going to be managing the chat box and working through the questions and trying to manage that aspect. And again, these have all been members of the team that have worked on putting this together as we've went through this process. So again, questions are welcome. We encourage questions, but please place those in the chat box and we'll deal with those later. I also want to mention to you that a website has been set up for information related to this, the application, information. There'll be an FAQ section that we'll be posting online, and that can be found at lawrencechamber.com/CARES or CARES. Again, that's lawrencechamber.com/CARES, CARES, and that will be the place where you can go for information and the application, the supporting information, anything else that we can find that we think would be helpful to this process or to the CARES Act 2 or to the Spark 2 process will all be there. So we hope that that will be a resource that you can continue to use going forward. So with that, I would like to introduce and ask Sarah Plinsky, our County Administrator, to kick off the session with her comments on providing some context and background on this process and what we're trying to do. Sarah?
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate everyone being on the call today and being a part of this process. As Steve's mentioned, this is round 1 of CARES Act funding. It is funded by federal coronavirus relief funds managed by the state Spark Committee and Spark Office. So this is round 1. And of that round 1 that was distributed to counties, it was $400 million. There is a remaining $630 million for rounds 2 and 3. So to give you a sense of perspective, statewide, This is, the first piece is 400, the rest was 630. So of that was distributed to 400 million that was distributed to counties, Douglas County is eligible
It's probably just getting back on the internet. She get back over there.
24.9 million. So that's what we're eligible to receive. Before we were aware that we even had these funds coming to us, the county had transitioned out of unified command and created a recovery team framework. And that was led by the recovery coordination team that includes the city, the county, the health department, LMH Health, the Chamber of Commerce, and as well as a superintendent of public schools in Lawrence, Anthony Lewis, and Chancellor Gerard at the University of Kansas. And, you know, we had really created that group to help us manage and navigate our recovery. Inside those recovery teams, inside that, we created 4 recovery support functions. And I'm going to use a lot of acronyms as a part of this process, but it is really tied to emergency management and national incident management systems. So inside that, there is a group for education, there's a group for housing and human services, there's a group for health and medical, and there's a group for economic impact. So there are 4 different recovery support functions, each working on their piece of development of a direct aid plan. So if you know, I know I saw some folks on this call that work with long-term care facilities. You know, I'd highly encourage you to talk to folks in the health and medical RSF, and that's led by Beth Llewellyn at the health department. And if you're a nonprofit and you work in the housing and human services area, I'd encourage you to talk to Jill Jolliker with Douglas County, and she's leading, and Shannon Oury, and they're leading up the housing and human services area. They're managing those RSFs for those purposes. So, and each group has kind of their own process that they're using to sort of develop their section of the direct aid plan. What is eligible? And I know Diane may get into some of that, and there are some resources on the website in terms of the kinds of projects that are eligible. But I think it's fair to say that the way these funds are designed is they need to be tied to COVID, and either COVID mitigation or COVID recovery or COVID response. They're highly encouraging us to put the health and medical needs of our community first. We fully anticipate that is our top priority as we develop this plan. That being said, it programs for small businesses and businesses to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 are eligible expenses, along with direct distance learning. So the school districts and all of the different various schools from infant to higher ed are also eligible for this funding in Douglas County to help promote, to reimburse them for their expenses so far, and then to also help them prepare for distance learning. All of this work, it has to happen very quickly. And I apologize, but it is not my fault. The state of Kansas has put very tight timelines on us for the development of this plan. The county has until August 15th to submit a plan to the state. That means before that, the Board of County Commissioners has to review the plan and approve it. So we are asking that all of the recovery support functions, so the economic impact group, that we need all of that information into the county no later than August 3rd. And I know Diane will probably go over some timelines with you for submissions, but we will be working on a very tight timeline to make it, to review this plan and prepare it. Like I said before, with the number of groups involved, we anticipate getting $50 million in wonderful requests for our community and having to do the very, very tough job of narrowing it down to 24.9. That being said, public sector reimbursements also are included in this 24.9. So, expenses already incurred by the city of Lawrence, expenses already incurred by USD 497, LMH Health, the Public Health Department are also have to come out of this 24.9 million. I do anticipate that those reimbursements will probably eat up at least $2 million. So that lowers the pot of money that we have to work from to develop our direct aid plan of 22.9 to at least, it will lower it in some way. And then the county commission will make their decision based off of the criteria that forward to counties and develop a plan that best meets the needs of Douglas County as a whole, knowing that there are other rounds of funding yet to come. And so while I don't want to send you all a message of like that there won't be room for economic funding in this plan, any work you do now and isn't a part of our plan could be a really great project for round 2 or round 3. So I highly encourage folks to think about the long game here in terms of preparing their proposals. Just a couple other quick things I want to mention. So these are federal funds that come to Douglas County for management. We are the financial stewards of the funds. Normally Douglas County receives about $400,000 a year in federal funding. So that now jumped to 25 million. So we have a lot of financial accountability work that we need to do to manage funds. There will be receipts will be required. There will be detailed accounting required for the development of this plan. All of the funds have to be spent in this calendar year. Everything has to be spent by 12/30/2020. So that should also help frame the kinds of projects you work together on. In terms of working together, so the county anticipates that we will probably be working with hundreds of different entities that will be approved as a part of this plan. But any way you can collaborate with your peers, friends, and networks to group proposals together, the better off I think you are. As opposed to necessarily having every individual restaurant in Lawrence submit a direct aid plan for reimbursement, if there are ways you can collaborate through organizations such as the Chamber of Commerce, Lawrence Restaurant Association, Downtown Lawrence, Explore Lawrence, and other groups to collaborate, Douglas County Community Foundation, I think the better off you will be, because there can be some sharing and some shared workload in managing that. And then also it will allow, it'll help with the administration of the funds through the remainder of this year. Did I miss anything, Steve or Diane, that you wanted me to cover? With that, I guess I turn it over to Diane, and I'll stay on the phone and can answer questions at the end.
Thank you, Sarah. Diane?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Diane Stoddard, Assistant City Manager for the City of Lawrence. And first, I just want to remind everyone, we've got a lot of people on the call today. So if you would make sure that you have yourself muted. And for those who may not be familiar with Zoom, the mute button is on the microphone icon at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, right next to your video button. For those of you who may be calling on a telephone, you can just mute yourself the way that you typically mute your phone, or press *6. And you can also then unmute yourself later if you have a question at the appropriate prompting by Brit. You can unmute yourself. So if you'd help us out with that, that would be great, because it will be kind of hard for everyone to hear otherwise. I do want to echo the comments of Steve in the opening about how empathetic all of us are to your situation as business owners and folks leading organizations in the community. This has been such an amazingly difficult time, and we understand the best that we can, probably as non-business owners, the kind of situation that you all are in. And anyway, our hearts go out to you at this time, and I just hate that we're all dealing with this, but we are trying to make the best of it, and want to share this information with you today. So again, I'm going to reiterate what Steve mentioned. The key website for you, which is in the chat box at the very beginning, is lawrencechamber.com/cares. That is going to be the portal of information for you related to funding through our recovery group, which is aimed at business community. And it's also aimed at organizations and businesses that are not health and medical related, that are not housing and family services related, and are not educational institutions per se, unless an educational institution might be applying for something that would be of assistance to help a business. So I'm going to be sharing my screen here, and we'll be walking you through the portal that we have created for information. So what you can see here is that lawrencechamber.com/cares website that we mentioned. And this will be the portal of information for you that is key to have throughout this process. As Sarah mentioned, we are apologizing in advance for a very tight turnaround on what our group will need from you all as far as applications. The applications are going to be due by Thursday at noon on July 30th. So we realize that doesn't give you a lot of time, but you might have some comfort here as we go through this, that the grant application itself is fairly simple. I'm going to be covering the eligibility information with you, what our application steps will be, and how to submit an application through our group. So on the page, you will see right at the top a red text here for eligibility information, FAQs, application steps, application resources and materials, and application submission. Click here. And also we have a portal for submitting questions. So if you have a question that will inevitably pop up as you're working on something, we are asking everyone to funnel those through this portal as well. So I'm going to click on this button, and it will take you to a handy website here that you will get all the information that you need. And I'm going to walk you through this because this is what you'll be relying on for information. So you see at the very top, a sign up for email updates. We're encouraging everyone, please sign up for email updates. This will enable us to communicate with you in this very short time frame between now and next Thursday. If we have additional updates to make, we have additional reminders to make, we have additional questions that have been posted and answered here for everyone, because we imagine people will have similar questions. So please make a note of signing up for those updates. The first paragraph here is what we've already covered somewhat, where we're talking about the county funds that are available through round one, not to be confused with round two, which we'll touch on here a little bit later. Again, our RSF and the application process that I am covering today is only aimed at the business community or other organizations which are not health, medical, housing, human services, or education. As Sarah mentioned earlier, those types of organizations should seek guidance from the other groups organized under that recovery coordination team. And if you follow the link here on the website recently announced by Douglas County, it will have greater information on how you can contact those other recovery coordination team members. Again, our funding applications through this business funding process will need to meet eligibility criteria that I'll cover, and will be due by noon on Thursday, July 30th, or next week. I know it seems like next year in some ways, but it's next week. I'll cover now the funding availability and eligibility, which is the next section here on the website. So let me scroll down here just a bit. And by the way, for those of you following along, again, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you can move the box that has everyone's video pictures in it a little bit so you can see some of these things a little bit clearer on the screen. So funding eligibility and availability. Again, as Sarah covered, the county has a total of $24.9 million in funds. However, some of the top priority will be given to direct reimbursement expenses for COVID-19 that were incurred by the Unified Command Partners, that being the city, Douglas County, and the Lawrence Douglas County Health Department and LMH Health, along with other county community aid programs. The county does not know how much these reimbursements may be requested at this time, and so the exact amount eligible for businesses is not exactly known. Remaining funding, though, after these other priorities are met, could be eligible for businesses to apply for. And our highest priority is going to be aimed at businesses with direct expenses related to COVID-19 and small local businesses that are under 100 employees in highly impacted sectors. And I'm going to cover this a little bit more here later. Again, the exact amount of funding is unknown at this time. But I think that if you are considering submitting an application and you meet the criteria, I would really encourage you to do that, because if there's opportunities through the next round of Spark funds that Steve and Ryan are going to touch on here in a bit, then you maybe have a jump on it, even if you might not be funded through this process. In order to apply, a business or organization must have a federal EIN number. So an EIN number is an employer identification number, also known as a federal tax identification number. And again, as Sarah mentioned, businesses are encouraged to work together to submit umbrella applications related to common expenses related to an industry sector when at all possible. So what that means is, again, using the example of restaurants, if those can be submitted under an organization which holds an EIN number, that would be very handy. So an example might be, again, that restaurant association helping with organizing an application for restaurants. So it's not required, it's just very helpful in this situation to have that. The other thing to be aware of that Sarah also touched on is that businesses receiving funds or coordinating the receipt of funds, say they are going to be administering a grant program or whatnot, if you're the entity that has applied and received the funds, you're going to be required to work with the county to submit reports for federal reporting, including receipts and other documentation of expenditures. And you'll also be required to enter into a funding agreement with Douglas County if you're selected for funding. So there are ongoing requirements. Again, these are federal funds. As Sarah mentioned, there's a lot of scrutiny over how these are spent, and the documentation about that will need to be carefully made. As Sarah mentioned, also, funds must be incurred within the time frame March 1st, 2020 through December 30th, 2020. So you can look back at expenses that you have already incurred. As an example, maybe you've already installed plexiglass in your business to protect against transmission of the virus. You've expended funds for personal protective equipment, and this goes back to March 1st. As long as you're within that time frame, it's an eligible expense. Again, if you are meeting the other eligibility expenses for the application. And you have to have those expenses incurred no later than December 30th of 2020. I want to highlight that the county has established some guidance regarding the eligibility of expenses for applications. So we have this linked here. And we also have it linked in another part of the of the information. I'm going to try and make this a little bit larger so we can go through this together. So this is a document that the county put together to help identify what eligible expenses are considered under this round one of funding. So you can see that these are reimbursement expenses and some examples of reimbursement expenses. I don't think that this list is all inclusive, but it gives you some ideas of those things. Things that might be relevant to the business sector might be things such as personal protective equipment, again, the plexiglass modifications that you might have made. And then economic support, which these are some examples of. If you wanted to create a grant program for small businesses within your sector to reimburse costs of business interruption, those sorts of things would be eligible. We would encourage you to also seek additional guidance if you need more details on this federal eligibility link that we have on the website. So now moving into how applications will be ranked. The county has requested that our group send the applications to them in an order of a high, medium, and low priority for consideration. So you can be assured if you submit an application through our process, everything will be forwarded to the county commission for consideration, but they will be done in a high, medium, and low priority order. And our economic recovery team thought it was important that you all knew at the beginning how we would rank these applications and what our thought was in creating these criteria. So there are 4 major points here under this website about how our recovery team will rank applications, and it's guided by these 4 points. The hardest hit sectors we know regarding COVID-19 are accommodations, food service, arts, entertainment, recreation, personal services, and retail trade. These are the same sectors which will also likely to take the longest to recover from COVID-19. And if you're interested in reading some of the citations about that, this is one of the citations that we have attached. Also, we know that small businesses under 100 employees are the most hard hit with COVID-19. Again, the citation is there if you'd like to take a look at that. Locally owned and operated businesses are of particular concern to the economic recovery team. These are the kind of businesses that really make Lawrence and Douglas County unique, and we want to pay particular attention to those businesses. Also, highest priority will be placed on applications with a direct tie to expenses related to an adaptation of COVID-19. Again, these are expenses including personal protective equipment expenses. Maybe you've been buying masks and those sorts of things for your employees and your staff. Maybe you have made physical modifications to work areas, such as the installation of plexiglass. Maybe you have incurred expenses related to equipment and supplies for monitoring symptoms of employees and customers, or expenses related to additional or special cleaning routines. Or maybe you've also had to train or retrain your employees as it relates to COVID-19. Or maybe you are trying to address a program that helps to retrain people who have been unemployed as a result of COVID-19. So these are all examples of things that have a very direct tie to COVID-19. And these will be prioritized ahead of things that are business disruption expenses. And again, as I mentioned, these can have a look back to March 1st of this year and can have a look forward to expenses that you indicate that you may be expecting between now and the end of the year through December 30th. I would ask that if you're completing the application, you are as careful as possible about making your budget that you submit as close to actual as you can possibly anticipate. Because as we have learned from the county, that if we have overestimations on applications and the county ends up approving the plan and submitting it to the state, and let's say, for example, using an example, the Restaurant Association has submitted an application which is funded for $200,000 for the for personal protective equipment and modifications to have restaurants operate safely. But let's say at the end of the day, they're only able to show $100,000 in actual expenses. That will be very unfortunate for our county because we will have lost out on $100,000 of potential use of funds, because as we understand it, those funds would then have to be returned to the state if they are not utilized. So your application steps are going to be as follows. You get a gold star for tuning in and watching this funding webinar, because we're going to ask everybody to do that. We are going to record this webinar today, as well as the webinar that we are doing Thursday evening at 6:30 p.m. We will post the webinar recordings, both of them on here. There may be some questions or some other things that come up in the second webinar that you might be interested in. It will largely be covering exactly the same information that we're covering with you today, but there may be some other things and you might want to refer to that. And then again, you might be forgetting some of the details. Well, you'll be able to get back on the recording and hopefully have your question answered or review that. Number two, you're going to want to verify that you are an eligible business or organization. Again, you have to have a federal EIN number and you have to have eligible expenses. And those expenses, again, are outlined in the Douglas County funding guidance document, which is, by the way, we put another link to that down here under resources and application materials. And again, you've got to make sure these expenses are incurred in the time frame we discussed. You are also going to then download and fully complete either the program application or the transfer application, depending on the type of application that you're submitting. So those documents are located here under the resources and application materials information. You can see there is a program application link here. This will link to an Excel file, which you will then need to open and save as, and we're asking you to name the file as the name of your proposal submittal for us before you upload it to us. You will also see the transfer application here. The same thing applies. You will also be able to open it and view it. You'll need to complete it. You can save as to save it to your computer, and then you will want to rename the file, your proposal name, so that we can keep it all together. And you will want to then submit one or the other of these applications. So what's the difference between the applications? The program application is only going to be used if you are submitting a proposal which involves the extension of applications from the other from a larger audience. So an example would be your proposal is a loan program or a grant program that you are then going to be receiving applications for. Only in those circumstances where a future application is going to be involved will you use the program application. So we anticipate that being probably somewhat rare that you may use the program application. Probably most of the time, you're going to be using what is called the transfer application, which is this other document.
I love you.
Again, I'm going to remind everyone We've got a lot of people on the call. If you can
My brother's gonna be
to
coming in.
mute yourself.
Okay, I'm getting set up.
Those who are connected on a phone, if you can mute yourself by muting or pressing *6. And
Basically, very.
all right. Sorry about that. Everyone, again, as a reminder, I've got a lot of people on the call. Please make sure that you are muted because other people cannot hear if you are using the audio. If you're calling by phone, make sure that you're muted in the way that you typically would mute your phone or put *6. Okay. So getting back to these applications, as I mentioned, you're going to submit one or the other. And I have attached another document here, which is some details on how to complete your application. So let me just click on one of these and bring this up. This is a very busy Excel file. There's a lot going on here, but what I want to mention to you is that there's some additional guidance in these tabs here that may be helpful to you. There's some spreadsheet instructions. A number of these things may not be relevant because, again, we have broken out the two tabs that you will actually submit as your application. Remember that program application or the transfer application that I mentioned. However, when you're filling out those other applications, being able to reference this document, which provides detail about how the state wants expenditure categories in your budget, which is what I'm going to pull up here. And by the way, if it does what it just did to me, where it looks like there's nothing on the page, you just need to scroll over here and scroll over a bit to the top. And you will see all the ways that the state and the county are wanting you to categorize expenditures. So an example would be if you are submitting a proposal to have a retraining program for employees who have been dislocated and unemployed as a result of COVID-19. You would submit some of those expenses here in an economic support category, most likely. So probably workforce development or one of these kind of categories. Again, you'll need to familiarize yourself with this when you're putting together your budget and know that you can find this information again on the website under this how to complete your application details. The next thing that we'll want you to do is to read and complete the Racial Equity Impact Analysis Tool worksheet. That is located here. Jasmine and Paula are going to go through that with you here later on in this webinar, but this is where you'll find that information. Again, you'll want to double check that you have completed everything that is being asked for on these application forms. Let me just give you a quick example of the transfer application. When you click on this button, you will have information that you'll be required to fill out these blanks. So again, you'll want to save this file as something on your local drive. We want you to save it as the name of your proposal so that it will be uploaded with the right file name for us. But you can see this is relatively brief. If any of you have ever filled out a grant application, let alone a grant application for government or certainly federal government funds, this is the shortest application you will probably ever see. So these are the things that we're wanting you to complete and make sure that you have fully submitted. I won't click on the program application document, but it's very similar in the look to the transfer application. So now you're done with all these steps down to number 5. Once you've completed all this, you're going to be ready to submit these application materials. And you're going to use the application form that we have down here below. So I'm going to scroll down. And on my way, I'm going to be passing here frequently asked questions. You may remember earlier I said that we are asking everyone to do your best to submit applications through this portal. When you want to submit an application to us, you will click this button. You will insert your question and you'll click send. That way our team will make sure that we are answering it most expeditiously. We will also be populating this frequently asked questions with the questions that we get on the webinar today, as well as any questions we get submitted via this website and the webinar that will be held on Thursday. And we'll also be sending out some reminders from time to time to you via the email sign up that I mentioned at the beginning, and that's at the top of the screen. We'll be letting you know, hey, we've updated the FAQs. You'll want to check that out. So we'll have questions and answers here. This blue area is your application form. So what you're going to do is you're going to give the name of the proposal, and you're going to fill out, again, yes or no, do you have an EIN number? If you do not, the application is going to say you cannot apply for these funds. You're going to need to find an organization that might be able to sponsor an application under an entity that has a federal EIN number. The next section is going to be contact information. We're just asking you to complete this so that we have a good record of the main contact for the application, and a phone number and an email that we can get to you if we have a quick question for you on what you might have submitted. Next, the proposal information. So you click on this section and it pops up with some fairly simple questions. So you may recall the 4 criteria that I mentioned that will help our committee ultimately categorize whether a particular application is a high, medium, or low priority. You're going to answer these questions. The more that you can answer yes to these questions, the highest priority applications will answer yes to all 4. It may not be a guarantee of funding, again, related to the amount of funds that are ultimately available and the amount of businesses that end up being highly ranked. So that'll be a function of once all these come into the county commission's deliberations that Sarah covered. So you're going to answer here, is your proposal on behalf of a business or businesses with 100 employees or less? Is your proposal on behalf of a business or businesses or employees in a sector that has been most impacted by, again, one of these sectors? And if you say yes, it's going to ask you, select one or more sectors that your business engages. Again, if you're doing a proposal, let's say that covers a couple of these sectors, you can click as many boxes as you need, and you may only be clicking one box here. The next section is simply, is your proposal on behalf of a business or businesses that is locally owned and operated? You're going to simply reply whether that's yes or no. And does your, oops, I scrolled a little quickly there, hold on. Does your proposal tie directly to expenses related to adaptation of COVID-19? Again, the kinds of examples that I gave earlier, those kind of things are going to be prioritized a little bit more than, say, I have some revenue shortfalls because people weren't out and about as much as they usually are. And the reason why, again, we're having to prioritize this is we've been asked to do so by the county, but also I'm sure that it's a recognition that there won't be enough funds to fully fund every request that is being submitted here. The next section of this application is, remember, you are going to be either submitting the transfer application or the program application in the original spreadsheet format. You're going to have named the file the name of your proposal, and then you're going to come here, select the file on your drive, and get it ready to upload. You're going to fully complete that racial equity and impact analysis tool. And you're going to also name it, proposal name, and you're going to select it. And then when you've reviewed your submission, then you can submit it. Again, it'll all come to our group, and our group has a very quick turnaround between the date, again, that these applications are due, which I'll reiterate is, again, Thursday, July 30th at noon. We have to submit these in our rank order, high, medium, and low priority, to Douglas County by 8 a.m. on August 3rd. And that feeds in with the calendar and the constraints that the county has already outlined that they have from the state. So I think I have covered all of my portion and probably then some. And I apologize for the amount of time that it has taken to go through that, but I think it's really important for you to get familiar with that website, which is exactly what you're going to use when you are submitting an application or referring to any of the guidelines required here. So I'm going to turn it back over to Steve at this time.
Yes, thank you, Diane. That's a lot of information, and you did an excellent job of presenting. Now we want to hear from our team members who have been working and have been involved with the development of the Equity Impact Tool. Jasmine and Paula, if you're available, please take the stand.
This is Jasmine Moore, Sustainability Director for the City of Lawrence and Douglas County. I'm going to share my screen so that everybody can see what the Racial Equity Impact Analysis Tool looks like. Okay, so everybody see that? Okay, so I wanted to say that the COVID recovery team, this larger group, committed to integrating racial equity into the COVID recovery strategy even before these funds became available. And that's because that group really acknowledged that there's potential for crises like these to exacerbate existing racial disparities in our community. And so one of the ways that the group attempted to elevate equity in decision-making and recommendations is to develop an advisory role specifically concentrated on equity. So each of those recovery working groups essentially has at least one or two people within those that are dedicated to asking questions and helping to elevate equity in conversations around COVID recovery and response. So when this pool of money became available, the equity advisors and the recovery team recognized that the distribution of these funds, it's really a key moment to think about how these funds can be distributed in a way that does not add to the existing racial disparities in the community. And so that's how this tool was developed and was adapted from some national models. And so this is a 2-page document. The first page is just instructions and gives some background about the purpose of the tool. And the purpose of the tool is to help step through some of the questions, some of the key questions that we want everybody to be asking when it comes to any decision that is related to COVID. So this is not something that's specific to the economic recovery group. This is something that all the working groups are using and the recovery team as a whole is using. So some of the questions may seem a little clunky if you are a business just applying for a direct transfer, but just keep in mind that this is a tool that's intended to be used by all of the partners. And so some of it may be more intuitive to this group and or more intuitive to another group. So the instructions again, are generalized to the purpose of this document, which is intended to be used by anybody involved in the COVID recovery. It's intended to help walk through the questions. There's only 3 questions that we're asking you to answer. It would be helpful if people that are affected most by the proposal or the decision are involved in the decision-making process. And this is required to be submitted with any proposal for the CARES Act funding. There's definitions around equity and what we mean by that. And there's also definitions around what institutional racism is, what racial equity specifically is, racial inequity, and structural racism. And then we get to the tool. So, to start off, there's at the very top, it asks you what RSF this is related to. So if you are applying through this process related to economic recovery, you're going to put a 1 there. Then it just asks you what your proposal is and what you're trying to accomplish. This is the same text that you're going to enter into the spreadsheet, so nothing new here. The next one, we're asking who participated in completing this analysis. So for example, if to speak to one of the examples that Diane or Sarah alluded to earlier, if you are a group, say Explore Lawrence is going to be coordinating a program for the downtown Lawrence or something like that, and that group wants to submit an application for a program to distribute funds to its members. This would be an opportunity for you to describe that some of those members were involved in the development of the proposal and the analysis of completing this tool. So we're just trying to get a sense of who was involved in the program development and the analysis here. And then question 1 is, what does this proposal have an ability to impact? So there you'll see a lot of different sectors here. We anticipate that for the folks on this call, there's going to be a focus on economic development. There is another one on economic stability, which is connected to our community health plan goals. And so this is where, you know, if you're doing workforce training, that would fit in there. And so I'll let you look through and see if there's any others that you think this would have an ability to impact. But this is where we want to get you to think about that. And then the next question is, who will benefit from or be burdened by this decision? And this is where we give folks an opportunity to think about, you know, if you have data around what communities are affected most by COVID, and this program or proposal will help to alleviate some of that, reduce the disparities. That's where we want you to talk about that. And there's lots of different ways to answer that question. You'll see that the text box is not large here. We're not asking you to write a whole essay, but we want to know that you've thought about some of these things. And the third question is, are there strategies to mitigate any unintended consequence of this decision? So this is where we're challenging you to think about, you know, are there some possible unintended consequences of your proposal? And if so, can you think about how to realign your work to, so that those consequences could be lessened? So that's it. That's the end of the equity tool. And again, this is something that we're asking everyone to do, no matter what sector you're applying for. And it's intended to help bring racial equity to the front of decision-making and conversation. These are going to be accompanied with your application. This is information that will ultimately be available to the county commission as they make decisions as well. So with that, I will turn it back to Steve. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those at that time.
Thank you, Jasmine. To finalize the commentary before we get into the question section, Ryan Rains of the Chamber and I are going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we understand is being proposed and some of the concepts that are embedded in the next round of Spark funding, which would be round 2, I guess, technically. And this is a process that's currently underway. There is a task force, as we discussed before, that was assigned the responsibility, working with various entities to identify what the priorities should be, and also what the funding buckets would be for the various aspects. And the latest information that we've had, and is being updated as we speak, because the Spark Task Force was meeting this morning, that at least the allocations that I had seen and work that was made available on Monday was that they had, the way we're approaching it is they had a number of agencies that either individually or working as groups had put together proposals that were being submitted for to the task force for approval or recommendation. And those included an ask from education. There was a work team for education that was approximately 74 million. Public health had a request of about 86 million. There's a lot of emphasis and interest in promoting and supporting broadband, particularly in rural areas, but across the state. And there was an ask there for 60 million. And then the part of that's more germane to this group and of more interest was the economic development and workforce piece, which is around 78.5 million. And at least the preliminary information, and again, the Spark Task Force was going to take action on moving this forward. And as that happens, there is at least one more step in the process. The Legislative Finance Council, the State Finance Council, also has to approve these allocations. But we'll give you kind of a sense of at least where it looks like it's kind of playing out at this point. And in the modeling or the information that we've seen, it indicates that there's going to be, of that 78.5 million roughly, there's like $61.5 million that are identified for business retention and expansion, and maybe a little broader scope than that, but for business support. There's $9 million for support of local food systems, and then there's about $9.5 million for workforce support and retraining. And as you look at those boxes, and I'm going to have Ryan here in a little bit get into a little more details about one of those programmatic areas. On the business retention and expansion side, they've identified $32.5 million for small business and nonprofit grants. There are $7 million in grants that are related to COVID R&D and product development. And then there's $22 million in grant funding available for in-state COVID-related and PPE manufacturing. So those three components make up $61.5 million. On the workforce development side, it's broken down into some programs that would actually provide support for equipment in certain categories of activity that the state is very interested in promoting around automation, advanced manufacturing, et cetera. There are some additional monies for support of the workforce development system to provide some extra capabilities there, but $9.5 million there. And then I'll have, and then on the business retention and expansion side, I mentioned that there's $32.5 million in small business and nonprofit grants. Of that, what we have understood is there's about $20 million that are specifically for small businesses that I'm going to have Ryan address here momentarily and talk a little bit about what we understand that may look like. So Ryan?
Sure. Yeah, Steve, so they talked about the potential of Network Kansas receiving $7 million to be dispersed in amounts up to $15,000. So up to $15,000 grants. So roughly 466 different grants. That would be for Johnson County, Wyandotte, Douglas County, and Shawnee. And what they discussed was that any business that had received over $2,500 from higher PPP or EIDL, the EIDL, would not qualify for this funding. They also mentioned that it would potentially come out in mid-August or September. So still more information on that that's needed. But that's what we learned about earlier this week as the possibility.
Kind of continuing on, there's a lot of discussion about size of business that would be eligible, and they've talked about 50, the cutoff being 50 people, 50 employees or 35 employees, and that was still to be determined. They also, as Ryan mentioned, there was a considerable amount of discussion about qualifications, and I think that they're very interested in trying to provide some support for businesses that may have not gotten support to this point, but we're not sure exactly how that's going to work out. So that's something to stay tuned for. And in addition to the $20 million overall statewide for small business, of which this $7 million for the 4-county region in our area is a subset of, they also talked about some specific efforts with some of this additional money. But the difference between, I guess, the $20 million that's already been kind of identified for the program that Ryan was talking about statewide, and 32.5 million in total for small business and nonprofit grants. It also appears that they are looking at maybe some possibilities of targeting some money for minority-owned business, art-related businesses, and for certain kinds of nonprofits, including arts-based organizations and that sort of thing. And again, we don't have a lot of detail at this point. This is all kind of a work in process, but this kind of outline is what the Sparks Task Force was taking action on, or took action on this morning. So we should be hearing a lot more information as this moves forward. But at least as it was discussed in the webinar that we were on Monday, it appeared that probably the likely path by which applications for these various funding pools would move forward would be that the applications would go to those agencies, and they would be handling, like the Department of Commerce, say, at the state level, for instance, would be handling those that were related to small business relief. There would be another portal or another direction for the connectivity and broadband, public health. The public health component would be through, various agencies or entities that are involved with public health. And so it looks like that's how they're kind of slicing it up. But again, there's a lot of detail that still remains to be learned. And then, as I said, they had told us Monday that if the plan that as it was being presented passed muster, they thought it would be 7 to 10 days before they would be in a position that they could potentially start putting out an RFP or an application process. Again, because there's another step and they've got to get finalization on how this is all going to flow. But it probably will be coming very, very quickly. And then, as has been mentioned with everything else, the turnaround time will be pretty quick, because again, the monies that we're talking about here, it's the same situation as what Sarah and others have talked about, is these monies are intended to be spent by the end of the calendar year. So there will be an interest in moving this forward pretty quickly. And again, as we get more information, we'll try to make sure that it's posted and try to direct you to websites or links or other informational sources that will help provide information and keep you updated as we get more details. And then I do want to, before I leave the Spark and we get to the actual chat box questions, there is also a conversation, and it's also in the original plan, that there may be a round 3 of funding that would come a little bit later. And I think, at least my understanding was initially, the intent was that was to be kind of a, just in case we have another wave of COVID in the fall. And unfortunately, we've not gotten out of the first wave to this point. So how that will be handled, what the timing will be, we're not sure. But at least the original plan was that there would also be a third wave or a third round of that would provide some possibilities for funding later in the year. Again, as we understand, with the same end of December kind of backside time clock. So time is going to be of the essence on all this, and it really points to the idea of having projects or plans that can be executed quickly, and or the funds can be put into place on a very quick timeline, because there's just not a lot of time to do anything more beyond that. So that concludes the speaking portion of the program. Again, I want to urge you to continue to look to the Lawrencechambers.com/cares website as a source for information and updates. And that's where the portal to the application and all the information we've talked about will be. So please keep that in mind. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brit Concano, who's been managing the chat box, and so we can deal with some and work on some of the questions that have been received. Brit?
Thanks, Steve. We do have a few questions that have been posed on the chat box. I also want to remind those who are calling in that they can unmute themselves with *6 and ask a question. But let's start with our first question. Can you please clarify the difference between the program application and transfer application, and who should use which one?
So, and this is Sarah. I tried to put some information in the chat box to further illustrate the difference between the two. If you're an organization preparing a grant program or some sort of group program where multiple people might be the beneficiaries, transfer is probably your best bet. If you're asking for a direct reimbursement or a direct aid program for your particular organization, then program is your best bet. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that helps, Sarah. Also, somewhat of a related question, can an organization submit more than one proposal?
Yes.
Okay. This is a question from Michael Davidson from Explore Lawrence. If they plan to submit a plan on behalf of area hotels, can they charge an admin fee?
Yes, you can, but I would say that please be mindful of the fact that these are, we're trying to get as much funds out to the community as possible. So I would say admin fees over 5% would probably be asked to come down at a bare minimum. So please just keep your admin tied to really what costs you think you will need to administer the program.
Okay, if in terms of the transfer applicants and group submittals, are they required to distribute only to businesses with an EIN?
I believe we are. I think anything that all the allocation from the county has to go to somebody with an EIN.
Okay, thank you. Would you consider the nonprofit heritage organizations in the arts and entertainment categories? These organizations were very hard hit.
Yes, definitely.
Can we get reimbursement for expenses already paid for?
Again, it would be back to that March 1, 2020 date that we mentioned.
Okay, if you have received PPP or idle money, would it disqualify the business or nonprofit from receiving these funds?
I'm sorry, I dropped off real briefly, but I think I seen that question in the chat box. No, they are not prohibited from receiving those funds, but we do ask that they tell us what federal funds they have received and disclose that information, because we are not allowed to supplant any other federal funding sources. So if you did receive PPP funds, please outline what those funds were, and that you're asking for something that was not covered by those funds.
Ryan, perhaps you might want to reiterate with the comment that you made about round 2 Spark funds related to that question. Would you
Sure.
mind?
The round 2 funds, which was the concept that was discussed earlier this week, but has not, as far as we know, has not been approved yet. Those particular grants, if a person or a business had received over $2,500 from higher PPP or the EIDL loan, they would be disqualified from those grants. But again, that's a program that hasn't been approved yet, and There's some other stipulations with it. Hasn't been approved, hasn't been rolled out yet. Thanks, Diane.
Okay. That, let's see, we have a question from Sally of downtown Lawrence. Can an organization submit more than one application as an umbrella or collaborative partner? For example, downtown Lawrence submits to help members in different sectors and also for a public health plan for the downtown district. For example, sanitizing stations and signage.
Yes. An
Okay.
umbrella organization can submit multiple applications. We'll just want you to obviously delineate the differences in your proposals.
Okay, and one, I'm seeing some comments about confusion again on the two different applications, the program application and transfer application. You want to talk about that a little bit more, Sarah? You want to just reiterate what you said a few minutes ago?
Yeah, and I apologize if there's been confusion. Generally, transfers are if your organization wants to have a flexible pot of funds that can be used for a variety of purposes, for a variety, like the Lawrence Restaurant Association, if they were going to submit a request for reimbursement of PPE and protective measures taken, that they could distribute to multiple people, depending on what application process they use, that would be a transfer. If it's just for, if it's Peaslee looking for a program to support workforce development at just Peaslee, it would be a direct program. And both will be reviewed both are reviewed as a part of the direct aid plan by this RSF, and both will be evaluated by the county commission and submitted to the state for approval.
So Sarah, just to reiterate, what you're saying is if there is another application involved, it's going to be on the transfer form.
Probably, yeah.
And I apologize, the confusion is, I misunderstood that. So what I said was different from what Sarah is saying, okay? So you probably have a high likelihood of submitting a program application as opposed to a transfer application. The transfer application is the one that will have a different application form or process attached to it. So I'll get that corrected on the website. I'm sorry about the confusion, but I'm glad we were able to clarify it for everyone.
And I appreciate that too. Like these, literally, the information on the transfer application came out after we already distributed this to our RSF providers. Please understand, we get updates from the state daily as to changes to these forms and programs, and we're doing the best we can to pass that information along. If when in doubt, just submit it, and then we will help figure it out on the back end.
And again, that does go to my earlier comment about please do use that email sign up at the top of that website, because that will enable us to send out quick updates if these things change. I think that Sarah, the county just found out about some of this new information just on Friday, right? So it happens quickly. That'll provide us a quick turnaround to get information back out to you. So be sure and sign up for that.
Okay, we have another question. For CARES Act funding that reimburses costs related to COVID and public health, is equipment purchased to move existing in-person programming to an online format covered?
The way the CARES Act appears to be written at this point in time, that telehealth, so if you're moving to online from telehealth, is covered, and distance learning. So I would encourage folks to, if moving from just in-person to online, to see if it fits into one of those two categories, distance learning or telehealth. And that's the best guidance I have at this point.
Okay, I think that is the end of our chat questions. As a reminder, everybody, we will be posting all of our questions and answers on an FAQ on the web portal. So be sure and include additional questions there and also reference. Oh, looks like we have one more question. How about expenses related to moving to online sales versus in person during shutdown?
It doesn't specifically say that program, but it does say that there can be grants to small businesses. And so, I think we have the ability to try to ask the state for some clarification of if expenses are eligible. I will tell you, they've just not been responding very quickly at this point. I know they're really struggling to get staff on board to answer questions for counties. So, it's a possibility that, but that might be a better project for a later round.
Okay, can a tourism marketing program qualify?
I would think it would need to be tied to COVID and related to business interruption for tourism related industries. I think just a general marketing plan probably would not qualify.
Okay, where will the recording of this webinar be posted?
Remember that website that we've shared in the chat up at the very top and mentioned a couple times on this webinar. Real easy to remember. Lawrencechamber.com/cares. That's where you'll have the link to everything you need. And we'll be posting the webinars on that site, so you'll be able to see that information. One other quick reminder that I might say, we know that you all are going to probably be working on these applications at weird hours and probably over the weekend, given the deadline. If you are submitting a question via the website on the weekend, please put your personal email in the question submittal, and we will try our very best to get back with you with an answer this weekend. So again, if you're submitting something this weekend, just make that note, and that'll help us be able to get back with you. Otherwise, we'll be answering these questions as soon as possible, and as Brit mentioned, posting the questions and the answers on the website as we get them.
Yeah, I think that takes care of everything in our chat.
Well, thanks, Brett. And thank you all for participating today. We know it's a lot of information and kind of a strong dosage, but it's, as has been pointed out, we're working on a very tight time frame, and the scenario changes a little bit as time goes on. So we've had to be very flexible, and hopefully you will be able to be that as well. But do go to the website. That's where the information is going to be. We'll try to keep everything updated and as current as possible as we go forward. And again, as we find more information about this other upcoming round, we'll try to make sure that it's available too, in whatever format that we have at any given time, just to make sure that people are tracking and understand what's going on with it as well. So again, thank you very much. Thanks for your participation.